Hi, I'm Leah. Welcome to my channel. If it's your first time here, I am a crocheting stay-at-home mom, business owner turned yarn collector, crazy cat lady. Love crochet, I love yarn, and I am going to be teaching a crochet class in the upcoming days and weeks, and I am going to be putting together this series of crochet tutorials, tips, tricks, how-tos, and all of that good jazz just to help myself get my verbiage and figure out how to teach a class. I do a lot of online personality stuff. I go live a lot on TikTok and I make videos, but I feel like teaching a class is always a little bit different. So come on with me. We're going to try and figure this out together and give me a little bit of grace because I don't usually do a whole lot of tutorials, but I'm here and I want to try. So let's go learn how to crochet. Before we get too deep into this video, I do want to give you a warning. This video is intended for the beginner of all beginners. I have never picked up yarn or a hook before type beginners, so this is going to be a very information heavy video. If you don't feel like you need all of this video, that is totally okay. There should be bookmarked sections where you should be able to skip through and find what you actually need in this video, such as a single crochet tutorial, a double crochet tutorial, or you want to know more about yarn weights or crochet hooks. There are going to be a lot of sections, but be warned, it's going to be a long video, and find what you need from this, and thanks for being here. Before we jump right into the actual crochet, I think it's really important to start with understanding the materials that we're about to use. So we are going to go through reading yarn labels, understanding yarn weights, and understanding crochet hooks and crochet hook sizes. We are going to check out yarn labels and what all of this hubbub means. So the first thing you are going to want to pay attention to on a yarn label is the number that is in this cute little skein logo here. It is 1 through 7 or 8, and this is going to identify the weight of the yarn, which matters depending on what kind of projects you're using. And it's also going to kind of give you an idea of what kind of size project you are working with. You're always also going to find yardage and weight of the yarn, and then you will also find materials, and all skeins and yarn labels are set up a little bit differently, so you're going to see different variations of this information on different labels. But the other important part we are looking at is we are looking at these symbols here. I know that this looks really overwhelming, but at the end of the day, all we really want to do right now is look for what crochet hook it is recommending for this type of yarn. So again, I say this all the time with crochet. Crochet is very, very wide open when it comes to rules and regulations. There are a lot of things that you want to consider when you're picking a yarn and a hook size combo, and this is going to give you a guideline as far as where to start. It might not always be the hook size that you're going to use on your final project, but again, there's a lot of stipulations to that, but it is always a good starting point to look on your yarn label and find what kind of hook you should be grabbing to try out for your projects. And I'm just going to show you what some other labels look like in some different configurations. So this is going to be, again, this label is a little bit it's in a different place, but you're still all going to find the same kind of information. A lot of times you're also going to find, for whatever reason, I couldn't figure out the word for washing instructions, so I decided to put in a little extra chart for you guys to use and look at that has a little bit more information on yarn labels and washing instructions. All different kinds of labels, all different kinds of yarn. It's really going to depend on what label you pick up and what yarn. And some of them even have a little bit of a guideline for projects. So again, this one's telling you you only need 1 skein for a scarf or a hat, and then probably about 3 for a sweater. That's going to be dependent on the size that you're using, but again here we have the hook size, and then the yarn weight, and then here is one more label that I'll show you. I think this is an older label of this yarn. But this one's a little bit smaller, a little bit tinier to read, but Again, same information, and you'll be able to find this on almost any yarn scheme. With yarn size comes hook size and also hook type. There are so many different types and styles of crochet hooks. As you can see here, I went through my stash and I pulled out every different crochet hook that I own just to show you and give you an example. So there are lots of different reasons why there are different styles of hooks, and ultimately it all comes down to preference and comfort when it comes to the style of crochet hook. So you're going to have ones that have grips on them, which tend to be more ergonomic and happier for your hands. There are some straight line hooks, which generally are going to be the ones that you find in the beginner kits on like Amazon or the cheaper ones at Walmart or whatnot. These are probably the most common hooks I see people pick up and grab. This crochet hook has a little bit pointier of a tip, and while this one has a rounded tip, these are always going to be a good basic starter hook, and then once you figure out what to do with the hook, then you can decide how you hold it and then what you kind of want to work into. These are preferably my favorite hooks. These are called a Clover Amour hook. As you can see here, the metal is a little bit different of a color. This coating here is going to give a little bit smoother of a glide when you're crocheting. I find that these are also really easy to get a hold of. These are pretty common in crochet kits, again, on Amazon and stuff like that. These ones just have a little bit cheaper of a metal, so sometimes they get sticky on the yarn. But again, up to preference, up to how you crochet. I personally don't like a long neck crochet hook like this where there's a lot of room just because of the way I hold my crochet hook. I tend to hold my crochet hook like this, which is considered a pencil grab, while other people use knife, so sometimes they'll hold it like this. And I will try and find an example of a knife hold because I'm not really great at it because it just feels very awkward for my hands. So this is what we're looking at for a lot of different crochet hooks. And sizing, again, like we were talking about on the yarn labels, is definitely going to matter. When you are starting, I would say it's always great to start with a 5mm crochet hook or an H. I promise I'm not trying to overwhelm you with information and tools and stuff, but there's truly so much more to crochet than just a yarn and a hook, but I just want to give you the tools so you can come back to them later if you need them. If you want to skip through, that's totally fine too. But I want to talk about crochet hooks because crochet hooks have kind of a confusing label on them too. I know the yarn labels are hot and heavy and have all this information, but crochet hooks are also labeled as a letter and they're also labeled as a number. I think it's the US versus the metric system. Somebody, if anybody wants to correct me on that, feel free. But you will find on most crochet hooks, you will find either a number or a letter, or you'll find both. And sometimes you will run into patterns that just ask you, or just say that you need a like a crochet hook K or a crochet hook H, and then you're like, what the heck does that mean? But I will throw up a little chart here. It's a pretty easy chart. You can find this on Google. I found it on Google. I don't know. I don't have the numbers and the letters memorized. It's kind of a funky system, but it's always good to have something like this pinned in your saved photos or, print it out and put it on your wall because I find myself still searching up things and still searching up the numbers to letters conversion on the crochet hooks too, but good information to have. I'm sorry if it's overwhelming. So I've said this a million times, but how you hold your crochet hook and how you hold your yarn is completely up to you and how it feels the most natural for your hand. So I only know how to show you guys how I hold my hook and my yarn. So I gathered some friends to send me videos of them crocheting with their hook and yarn to show you guys a few comparisons of different ways that people hold it. So let's check those out. Hopefully you find a hold that makes sense for you, and just remember, it is truly what is the most comfortable for you. There's no right or wrong way to hold a crochet hook and yarn. So after we were done talking about hook sizes, it's important to talk about yarn types, and yarn sizes. It's really important to realize that yarn weights are a scale. It is a very wide open scale, meaning that just because a yarn is categorized as, say, a weight 4 or a 5, it's not going to be the exact same size as another weight 4 or weight 5. This is just because the weights are they're a range category. It's not a perfect science. I know it gets a little frustrating when you're trying to find different colors from different brands and try to work them together in projects, but it's really one of those things where it's going to come down to just you have to go out and do that comparison or look up videos about yarn comparisons. I have done yarn comparison videos in the past, so those are all tools you can use to figure that out, but let's dive into the different categories of yarn weights. So, yarn weights and yarn classifications. There is a range that starts at a number 0 and goes up to number 7. So, technically, there are 8 different categories of yarn weights. You can check out this little chart here if you want a little bit more of a deep dive onto more specifics. But starting at a weight 0, I don't have any of that yarn. I don't prefer to use it. If you want to envision it, you can think of your grandma's doilies and just very, very fine string, essentially, like embroidery thread type of yarn. That's going to be considered a lace weight or a fingering or a 10 count. I did stop at Michael's the other day, so I'll throw that clip up here. I did find a I think it might have been a one or a 0, but I'll throw that up so you guys can physically see it too. Number 1 is considered a super fine. That's the name of that category. Some yarn types in that one are going to be baby yarn, sock yarn, and fingering yarn. So that's again going to be a very, very thin yarn, probably about half of the size of a standard acrylic yarn that we're used to seeing. And again, just going to be making very small things. That's the kind of yarn you want to use for very intricate like mandala work, doilies, socks, very fine things when you want a lot of like draping. So that's always good. That's draping is also a good topic to bring up when you're trying to consider your yarn types. If you want to have more of a like a flowy fabric, because essentially when you're crocheting, you're creating a piece of fabric, you're going to want to find a smaller yarn because the smaller stitches are going to create more movement. And here is a weight 2 yarn. Weight 2 is considered a fine yarn, and this specific yarn can be used for amigurumi. It's a cotton acrylic blend, and honestly, any type of yarn can be used for almost any type of thing. It's really going to depend on preference, which I'm going to say a lot throughout this video because there are a lot of parts of crochet that are really just preference dependent. I don't like to work with smaller yarn like this just because it makes my hands cramp when I'm crocheting, just the way that I hold my hook and my tension and stuff like that. I can't really always do the smaller yarn unless I'm making more of a wearable project. I can use a little bit smaller yarn just because your tension changes between working like clothing items versus amigurumi. When you're working a plushie, your tension is always going to have to be pretty tight so you don't have the gaps. Weight 3 is called Light. This specifically is a bamboo yarn from Lion brand called Trubu. I'm not sure if they still make this. I've had this in my yarn stash for quite a while, but the fiber content in the yarn is generally going to be what your determining factor is for what category of project you're going to work, which that's a whole nother topic that I really don't have a whole lot of knowledge on. So I can't give you too much information there, but looking at the physical size of the yarn, this is again getting a little bit larger. Honestly, I can see that this fine number 2 and this number 3 are honestly pretty similar in size, which is why this category system isn't always the greatest. You really just have to use your best judgment and just kind of move on from there. But I've made a sweater out of this yarn before, but again, I don't like to work in these smaller weights. So we're gonna move on. We're gonna move on. And our weight 4, which is our medium weight yarn, this is where you're going to find a good majority of acrylic yarn. This is going to be like your number 4 is one of your most popular yarn weight categories because acrylic yarn is really one of the most popular yarns out there. And again, we're getting a significantly larger. This is probably going to be the yarn you see when you go anywhere looking for yarn. Acrylic is where I say everybody should start when they start crocheting. It's a great basic yarn. It's probably going to be the easiest. Acrylic is probably going to be the easiest to see your stitches in and just get a good feel for tension and everything when it comes to crochet. And I don't usually work in acrylic anymore just because I've moved away from like wearables, and I don't prefer to make plushies in a yarn like this because again, when I have smaller yarn, my hands start to cramp, especially when you're working a really tight tension. So, not my favorite, but a great place to start when you are just beginning. And moving on to number 5, which is considered bulky. This is where we get into the more fun and funky yarns. This is the new Big Twist Posh. This is this yarn is hard to talk about because it is a weird texture, and not weird saying bad, weird just different, because there's not a whole lot of other yarns that are similar to this texture. I consider it a like it's similar to blanket yarn, but it's the size and thickness of like a Chanel yarn. And that'll make a little bit more sense when once we dive into the next size. But this is a medium size weight. This is a size 5 is generally going to be a quick workup weight, especially when you're working in like wearables. There is a yarn type called Thick and Quick by Lion Brand that I see a lot of people use in the winter months to make like hats, scarves, like headbands, stuff like that. That's a really fun yarn when you feel like you're ready to jump into like a quicker pace project, because the thicker yarn obviously works up a little faster. So, moving on to super bulky, which is number 6. This is going to be our first category where I actually have a few different examples, and this is what I'm meaning when I say that the weight classifications are categories with a wide open range of like actual size, because these are all considered a super bulky. Of course, I have yarn fluffies everywhere. These are all considered a super bulky yarn, but they are all a different size. So you could work the same thing up with, you could work the same 4-row 10 stitch square and you would get a different size, because each one of these yarns is a different thickness. And if you want a little bit more of a side-by-side comparison of these, I do have that on my other yarn comparison video. But we have Burnette Blanket, which is a fan favorite of mine. It's not as much of a favorite. It was my beginner favorite. I used a lot of this when I was newer to crochet. These two are my personal favorites because I really like working with the soft and fluffy yarn. I make a lot of plushies and stuff like that. And this is Parfait Chunky. This is the Neons color line specifically. It's a little bit brighter, but it's the same as regular Parfait Chunky. And then this is Sweet Snuggles Light. This is Michael's brand. This is their house brand of yarn. It's under the Loops and Threads family. And they have Sweet Snuggles Light, and they also have I call it a sister label called Home Chanel Slim, which is the same exact yarn, but depending on what colorway you get, it's going to be a different label. So they have like a darker red, but it's labeled Home Chanel Slim, but it's the same exact size as Sweet Snuggles Light. But these are 3 of the yarns you'll find in the super bulky. And then we will move into number 7, which is considered jumbo. And again, I generally stay in the 6 category. Occasionally I'll jump up to the 7. I do like to use a lot of this yarn. This is, again, Michael's brand Sweet Snuggles. It's not Sweet Snuggles Light. This is the original Sweet Snuggles. And then this also has the sister of Home Chanel, with the different colorways being the different label. It's such a weird marketing choice for Michaels, but again, you can see that this is getting into being a pretty thick yarn. It's about the thickness of, it's thinner than my finger, but it's getting pretty thick. And then this is also a Michaels brand yarn, but Bernat also carries yarn very similar to this. This specifically is Cozy Blanket. This is one of their limited colors. They had it last year, I think, but I think they brought out a new round of it. But this, you will probably see a lot of people making like hand knitted blankets or hand crocheted blankets, those really big, chunky, crazy looking blankets. This is that yarn that they're using. I don't always I personally used to use this a little bit more often. I don't as much because it is one of those yarns where I find it hurts my hands just because the motions that you're making are so dramatic because it is so big. So stay away from this unless you want some hand cramps. No hate to those who love to use it, but it's not my personal cup of tea as much anymore. And as you can see, these are very varied in size, so very heavy on the yarn weights being ranges. So a lot of people I feel like are really into the crochet plushies right now, which I am too. I make a lot of plush projects. That's one of my favorite things to do. But I feel like that is not the best place to start if you truly want to build a good foundation on how to crochet. And if you don't really want to struggle too hard when you do go into learning new things like working in a round instead of working in a row back and forth like a blanket per se, I also feel like a lot of people start out with blankets, like really big blankets as their first project, which can be good, but I feel like blankets are really, really big projects, so I don't always recommend that either. I recommend just starting out with a little square. Um, just a little piece worked back and forth with rows, which we're going to get into, and I'm going to show you how to make one of these, just so we can practice our stitches, our stitch definition, and understanding the structure of a stitch, because at the end of the day, once you know your basics, you can basically go anywhere and try anything within the crochet world. And that's one of my favorite parts of the crochet world. So there are just so many stitches, there are so many stitch combinations, there are so many different things that we can truly make with crochet. Let's talk about some materials we should have on hand if we are getting ready to start crocheting. We are looking at, obviously, some yarn. You can use any type of standard acrylic, whatever works best for you, whatever you have on hand. I recommend starting with 2 crochet hooks of similar sizes, a blue 5mm clover crochet hook, and then we also have a 5.5mm crochet hook, which I know just a 0.5 size difference doesn't feel like that much of a difference, but it is definitely going to matter when we are looking at your tension and when we are trying to figure out how to crochet and work with controlling the yarn. So it's always good to have a couple different sizes on hand. And then we're going to need a tapestry needle. A little metal one is probably going to work better for this, but I don't have a metal one on hand. And then a little scissors and some stitch markers. If you don't have some actual stitch markers, you can use something like a bobby pin, an extra piece of yarn, or something like a paper clip, something that you just have the ability to scoop into the yarn. I think it is finally time to pick up a crochet hook and get started with the basics. So the first thing you need to know about crochet is a slip knot. So essentially this is going to be the starting point for almost every single project you make. This is going to get the yarn onto the hook and how we get all the projects started. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab your yarn, and I'm going to show you and then I'm going to kind of explain it. So we're going to twist, pull the tail, and do one of these numbers. I go ahead and place my hook into the loop, and then I pull our tail tight so it is comfortably snug on the hook here. And then this is our slip knot. And I'm going to go ahead and do that one more time. And then place it on our hook. We can basically kind of start to do the crochet. So our next step is going to be a chain stitch. So what you're going to do is this action here is called a yarn over, which is exactly what it says. You're putting the yarn over the crochet hook, and then you're going to pull the yarn through. Okay, and this is what we're looking at, a chain stitch here. And I'm going to do it one more time. We're going to yarn over, and then we're going to pull it through. Okay, we're just going to keep practicing that until we have a couple of stitches on here. And then eventually we're going to get up to a point where we have kind of a sizable chain here. And then this is called a starting chain. As you can see, we have, we'll go ahead and count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 starting chains. And this is going to be the base foundation to almost any crochet project that is working in a row, which means you're going to be working back and forth and back and forth. While we are practicing our chains here, I'm going to talk a little bit about tension. So tension is the act of holding onto this yarn and controlling the tightness of the yarn. So you can see how a good majority of my chain stitches here are very consistent in size. If you don't have a consistent tension or grip on the yarn, you're going to come up with like weird looking chains. So I'm going to do this with loose tension. And then you can see kind of the difference. You can see how these got a little bigger and bumpier. And the thing with tension and holding your yarn is, again, it's really going to be how it works for you and how it feels most comfortable for you. I know some people twist their finger around their yarn. Sometimes you can get yarn burn from that, which is a little scarier than it sounds, but you really just kind of have to play around with how you hold your yarn and your hook and get comfortable with that, and just practicing chaining is going to be one of the easiest ways to get that down. So I'll show you guys how I hold my yarn. You can see I'm holding my crochet hook kind of like a pencil, and then I kind of just put my yarn on top of my pointing finger and then underneath. And I call it a crab hand. I kind of hold my yarn on the underside like a crab hand here. So that's how I control my yarn. And once you kind of get used to it and get a feel for it, it's going to start to feel natural. It does feel a little bit weird and awkward as you're just getting used to holding a new tool and a new instrument, but eventually your crochet hook and your tension hand are just going to feel like second nature. And that's really kind of the beauty of the craft of crochet, is you're really just, you got to practice it and you have to make it feel comfortable for you. You have gotten a pretty consistent tension and you feel like your chains are starting to look really nice and really clean and are about the same size. It is time for us to try turning the chain and working into a first row. If we've made it this far, we've made it past chaining and we've probably gotten a little bit of a good tension going on. And so I have started here with a chain of 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I chose 11 because when we are working into a chain, generally we always skip the first one so it doesn't get too tight. So we are going to end up with 10 stitches as we start to work up instead of 11, if that makes sense. Also of note, when you are working in your first chain, foundation chain here, it is important to try and keep it just a touch looser than your general stitches and your general tension, because if it gets too tight here, it tends to shrivel up and then it starts to get to be a weird shape. So we are going to go ahead and try to work into a single crochet here. So we are going to go ahead and we are going to skip this first chain here, and we are going to insert our hook into this top loop of our first working chain. And then what we're going to do is we're going to yarn over or under, as long as you can grab the yarn with your hook, however that works for you. And then we're going to pull it through. And then we're going to yarn over one more time, and then we're going to pull it through. Okay? So this is what a single crochet looks like. I know it's a little hard to see at this point, but I'm going to continue and then slowly show you how to work down this chain. So again, we're going to go into this top loop here. We're going to pick up our yarn underneath. We're going to pull it through. We're going to then have 2 loops on our hook. We're going to give ourselves another yarn on over or under, and then pull it through both of those loops. Then we're just going to keep working this all the way down.
under. And I find I personally learn best by just watching without the instructions, so if that works best for you, here you go. And then again, we're gonna look at our chain. We see the top loop of the chain and then the bottom loop here. We're gonna go into that top loop. Grab our yarn, pull it up, and then we're gonna pull another one over and through. Let me finish out the row here. All right, and then we are gonna take a break and we are just gonna look at these crochet stitches that we just made and we're gonna talk about them. So this is going to be our first row of single crochet. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, just like we said. And it is really important that we start to understand the way that crochet stitches look and just the structure of a crochet stitch. So this is going to be, like I was saying, our single crochet. You're going to see that each individual stitch has kind of made a little bit of a V shape on top. That's going to be a good identifier for you going forward so we know where to put our crochet hook next. And if you are into stitch markers, or if you understand what a stitch marker is, they are little paper clip looking guys, and these are going to be used to mark our stitches. A lot of people like to use these in the beginning and the end stitches so they don't miss their stitches. I'm going to go ahead and have us place one into our last stitch. We're going to find that last little V at the end there, and we're going to insert our stitch marker through there. This is going to help us make sure that we are not losing our last stitch at the end. Once you get more comfortable with crochet and crochet stitches and being able to see your crochet stitches, you probably won't need to use this as often or at all, but this is just going to be for our assistance and guidance right now. If your stitch got a little stretched out, you can always tighten up your slip knot over here at the end. And when we are working in a row project, generally there is going to be what's called a turning chain. This is going to help so your project doesn't get really tight and twisted on the ends. When you're working a single crochet, it's pretty standard to do a chain 1. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our chain and we're going to chain 1. And then we're going to go ahead and turn our project. So now we are working on the back side, and we are going to go ahead and ignore that chain that we just created, and we are just going to keep working into our first stitch. So as we kind of move it around and identify what we're working with, we can see that this here, right here, is our first stitch, and we are going to go ahead and get our crochet hook through that entire V. We're going to go underneath both that V there, and we are going to pick up a piece of yarn, pull that up like a single crochet in our previous round, and we're going to loop over. And then we are going to just keep working down the row in that same way. We're going to go under the V, put our crochet hook through, pick up a piece of yarn, pull that loop up, and then we're going to yarn over and bring it through our loops. And we are just going to keep working on this down the row. And again, we are into our V, pull up a loop, and loop over again. So this is why I say tension is going to be very, very important, because if you are too tight with your yarn tension or too loose, you're going to get a lot of extra gaps here, which in some projects gaps don't matter. If we're working on a plushie, gaps do matter, which we can talk about a little bit later. That's a little advanced for right now, but you don't want to be too loose or too tight. If it gets too tight, you're going to have a hard time getting your crochet hook into this little V here. And then we're just gonna keep going. We're just gonna keep working. Once we get to our stitch marker, we're gonna go ahead and make sure we're not forgetting that last stitch there. And we are gonna go buddy up with our stitch marker and get our crochet hook in there, loop up, pull it up, and then we're gonna yarn over and bring it through. And again, we've finished our second row of single crochets here. It's looking about the same as it did the first time around. And if you want to do it now, it's always a good time. We can go ahead and do that chain 1 because we know we're going to be turning to keep working. And then basically we're just going to keep working through this and we are going to eventually work our way up. and create a little bit of a square shape. So I'm going to go ahead and rush through that. You work through it at your own pace, but we are just going to keep working and just keep practicing this stitch and go from there. Okay, so this is our little single crochet practice square. We are complete with this, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull out some scissors, and we're going to give ourselves a little bit of a tail. We're going to cut it off, and then with our loop that's still open, we're going to go ahead and pull our yarn through. This is going to tie this into a knot and complete our square. And we can, if we still have our stitch marker hanging on, we can kind of take that out too. So this is our first completed project of crochet. We did it! I'm so proud of you. Okay, so now that we feel like we have mastered the single crochet, do we feel like we're ready to move on? Because I think we are. We are going to go ahead and start with a slip knot. Put that on our hook. And for this one, I did go ahead and change my hook size to an I or a 5.5 just out of preference, and I felt like I was getting a little nervous on camera and my tension was getting tighter, so I'm gonna give myself a little extra size room here. And we are gonna work on what is called a half double crochet, but first and foremost we're gonna start our chain. So again, we're gonna do a chain of 11. We're gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And again, if you feel like your hook is getting, if you feel like your crochet is getting a little bit tight, feel free to jump up to a new hook size. Figure out what's comfortable for you for the yarn that you're using right now. I also did switch yarn to another acrylic brand. This one is just a different texture and a different color. So we're going to go ahead and look at our chains that we made. We're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This 10th stitch is going to be the first one we go into. Remember, we skip our stitch here when we are turning and working into our chain. So a half double crochet has an extra step compared to the single crochet. So what we're going to do first is we're going to yarn over first, and then we're going to put our crochet hook into the stitch, and then we're going to go ahead and pull up again, and this time we're going to have 3 loops on our hook. We're going to do our yarn over once more and then pull that through the 3 loops instead of the 2 on the single crochet. This is going to create a little bit taller of a stitch. This is one of my personal favorite stitches when it comes to making anything like a blanket or a sweater or something like that. I just really like the look of a half double crochet when you work it in rounds. So we're going to go ahead and do that again. We're going to yarn over first, and then we're going to put our crochet hook into our stitch there, pull up another loop of yarn, and then we have the 3 there. We're going to put the yarn over, and we're going to pull that through. And then here we go one more time. And then slowly we're going to kind of just build a rhythm of a half double crochet. And as you can see, you can already see it is a little bit taller than our previous stitch. So we're going to keep working that. I'm going to do a yarn over, insert, pull a loop up, and then yarn over one more. And then we're going to keep working that to the end of the row. Alright, and we have made it to the end of our row of our half double. I'm going to pull this out so we can look at the stitches a little bit more closely. As you can see, this is the back side, so when we turn, we're going to start working here. You can kind of see how there is an extra bump here. That's the half double crochet stitch structure. And again, it does look a little bit thicker and a little bit taller here on this side as well. We're still going to see that same V shape on the top, and that's always going to be where we're going to be inserting our crochet hook when we're working a basic stitch like this. Again, just for ease of use and just for the beginners, we're going to go ahead and place our stitch marker in our last stitch here, so we are still able to find that, because I find the end of the row stitches always look a little bit different because we have a turning chain at the end here. And the first chain that we skipped here is actually a turning chain as well. So I find that a lot of people like to either chain 1 or chain 2 on a half double turning round, and a turning chain, I should say. I personally like to do just a chain 1, just like the single crochet, because I feel like it's just enough height just to get us turned here. If you want to do a chain 2, you are more than welcome to, but I feel like when you do a chain 2, I'm going to just zip ahead and show you what this looks like. It feels like it gets a little bumpy out here. It feels like a little bit too much extra yarn there for me, so I like to go ahead and just do that chain 1 and turn. Just like everything else, there are not a whole lot of rules, just recommendations and soft guidelines when it comes to crochet. So again, we are going to go ahead and locate our first stitch that we're going to go into. We're going to ignore our little turning chain here. And when I say we're ignoring our turning chain, that's also going to be very, very pertinent to whatever you're working on. Whenever you're working in just a basic square shape like this, you're generally going to skip your turning chain. That's not going to count towards the stitch count in our row. We only still have 10 stitches here, and then we have a chain. So it helps my brain to just ignore the chain and we don't count the chain. So again, we're going to go ahead and start with our yarn over there. We're going to insert it into our V, go all the way through, pick up our yarn loop, pull it up, and then we're going to go ahead and yarn over and pull it through. And we're going to do it again. And I think the reason why I like half double crochet so much is I feel like there's a little bit more structure and a little bit more definition in the top of the stitch versus the bottom of the stitch, so I find it's a pretty easy stitch to soar through once you pick up your speed and when you're able to feel like you're a little bit more comfortable with the yarn and the hook. I feel like a half double crochet gets going really fast when you get your rhythm down. And if you've been noticing, I use my pointer finger on my yarn tension hand to guide my crochet hook through the stitch. If that helps you and is comfortable in the way that you're holding the hook and the yarn, feel free to do that. I guide my stitch through and then I go ahead and touch the crochet hook. And then that's how I know that I'm going through the right place. That also helps me with my speed along with just practicing. It's always a good tip to figure out how your hands work. Oh, and you can see here I'm kind of having an issue with this. I accidentally picked up an extra piece of yarn that wasn't supposed to hop up onto my hook there. We're going to try that again. There we go. And then here we are at our last stitch here, making sure we get in there and we don't want to leave that guy. And there we go. We have created another 10 half double crochet here. And then usually when you get to the end, my general instinct is to go ahead and immediately put that chain 1. That'll probably come with practice. And as you can see, we're starting to see a little bit different stitch definition here. We are probably going to see this horizontal line pattern when we keep switching back and forth in our rows. And we are going to go ahead and just keep working and see what it looks like when we get to the end. I'm going to go ahead and stop here and we are going to cut it off again, leaving a little bit of a tail. And then we will pull our tail through our slip knot and pull it tight to finish that off. Take out that little stitch marker again. So let's look at the stitch structure a little bit. So here's the half double crochet, and then here is our single crochet. Obviously they're quite different in size. That's just because I did use a larger hook for this one and then a smaller hook for this one, and it is a different yarn. So this also just goes to show that different yarns and different hook sizes are going to give you different size combinations. Also, the half double crochet is a little bit taller, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. So as you can see in the half double, like I mentioned earlier, we do have these little bit of horizontal ridges going on. That is just due to the stitch structure. The single crochet doesn't have much of that going on. And then we do have it on both sides just because of the turning of the rounds. Now we have two of the most basic crochet stitches under our belt. Well, technically three, because the chain stitch is also a stitch too. So now we know the chain stitch, we know a single crochet, and we now know a half double crochet. Should we try the double crochet now? Do we think we're ready? Because I think we are ready for that one. It is really just an addition onto a half double, and it just requires one more yarn over in a specific direction. Now that we have worked our half double and our single crochet little squares, we are going to work on a double crochet, which essentially is just going to be a taller version of our half double. And I'm going to start in that using green here, and we're going to do just another slip knot here to get our yarn onto our hook. Pull that tight, and again we are going to go ahead and chain 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So for a double crochet, again, we are going to go ahead and look and find our 10th chain here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And this time for a double crochet, we're going to yarn over, just like we did for the half double. Go ahead and insert that in. We're going to pull up our loop. We're going to yarn over once, but this time we are only going to go through the first 2 loops on our hook. We're going to go through the 1, 2, pull up that loop, and then we're going to yarn over one more time and pull it through both loops. This is going to make our stitch get a lot taller, as you can see here. And then we're going to go ahead and try that again in our next stitch. We're going to yarn over. We're going to go in, pull up our loop, yarn over again, pull through the first 2, pull that loop up, yarn over one more time, and pull it through both. As you can see, it is getting significantly taller than our half double here. And we are just going to continue that down the row. And when we get to the end, we are probably going to want to chain 2 instead of chain 1, because as you can see, the double crochet here is going to be a little bit taller. Go ahead. Okay, we're going to yarn over, insert, pull it up, first 2, and then the last 2. Yarn over, insert, pull up a loop, yarn over one more time, through 2, yarn over again, through the last 2. Alright, and like I was saying, once we get to the end, you can kind of see that this is a little bit taller, and I don't think a chain 1 is going to cut it when we're turning and trying to make our stitches go straight up the side. So we're going to go 1, 2, and then we're going to turn. And then this chain 2 is creating the height of the double crochet, so we don't have any buckling or anything weird going on the sides. And then again, we can see that the double crochet is significantly taller. You can see that there's a little bit more of a gappiness going on in between these stitches. That just has to do with the height. That's very normal with a double crochet. This is also why a lot of people don't use double crochet when it comes to making plushies or amigurumi, because when you're making amigurumi, which is the art of plushie making, you want to make sure that you are making a solid fabric, similar to a single crochet, right? So you don't want to see your stuffing poking through the holes. All right, and let's keep working on our double crochet row back. We're going to go ahead and find our first stitch here, and we are going to do our yarn over, insert, pull up a loop, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2 again. And then we're just going to keep working on that down the row. And again, we forgot to put our stitch marker in our end here, but you can see that there is that little V there. So we're going to want to insert our hook under that V, and then that's going to become our last stitch there. And here we are again. I always tend to see that my double crochets, see if you can see it here, the one row tends to lean one way, and then my other row going back leans the other direction. That just has to do with my tension. Then we're going to chain 2, and then we'll turn. I'm going to keep going, and you guys finish up along with me. We have gotten to our little square, so I'm going to go ahead and take my hook out, grab my little scissors, and just like everything else, we're going to go ahead and pull that through the loop to close it off. And let's do a little bit of a comparison. I like to stretch my work out because sometimes the stitches and the chains get a little bit weird and tight, so it's always nice to give yourself a little bit more of a good shape to look at. And let's compare this to our half double crochet that's in the purple. You can see that it is significantly taller. Each row is going to be a good amount taller than the last. This is our first row of half double right here. And then this is our first row of double. And you can see that the stitch pattern is quite different. Again, we're stacked up a little taller in the middle here, middle part of the stitch, which is where all of those yarn overs come in, and that's how you create that height there. So there we go. I realized that I probably should have made this one in the same yarn type so we could compare it a little bit more directly. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll be right back with that. We are back. We are going to replace the pink one with the blue one because this is all in the same yarn type. And as we look at them, side by side, we can see all of the different textures that each different crochet stitch will create. So now that we have our basic foundation of our single crochet, our half double, and our double crochet, I think it's time to start working on some techniques and maybe learning how to read some patterns so we can make some fun stuff.
Thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a few things, and I hope we can continue to figure out new skills and tips and tricks together. But if you haven't already, subscribe below. You can find me on social media at Kouzi Krafts on almost any social platform. And if you have any questions, please throw them in the comments, and I'd be happy to try and help you through them. Have a good day and happy crocheting!